This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Today on CityCast Madison. Fake news, the good kind. We're talking about the beloved satirical news outlet, The Onion, which, if you didn't know, originated right here in Madison by a group of scrappy UW students. One of those students was Christine Wentz, the author of the new book, Funny Because It's True, How the Onion Created Modern American News Satire. We sat down with Christine ahead of her book talk happening tonight at Art and Lit Lab to learn all about the Onion's origins. It's Tuesday, March 18th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Christine, welcome to CityCast Madison. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, so we wanted to talk to you today because you've got a new book out, one that's of particular interest to Madisonians. It's called Funny Because It's True, How the Onion Created Modern American News Satire. And it's out now.
Yay! Yay!
For those who don't know, The Onion was actually founded in Madison back in the 80s, and you were there. We're going to get into that history further. But first, why was this the right time for you to write this book? Like, why now?
Well, the idea for the book actually came when I moved back to Madison from Boston in 2017. I'd been on the East Coast for like 20-something years. And of course, you move back to your college town, and I'm from the state of Wisconsin, so you think about what you did back in the old days. And this also happened to be the beginning of the first Trump administration. And so there was lots of talk about fake news, the bad fake news as opposed to the Onion's good fake news. And so being back in town, I was like, I wonder what the old Onion people think of this. And I hadn't really thought about the Onion in a long time. So I started digging around and talking to people and interviewing people, and took a while, but here we are today. And the book also started out as an oral history, so I had to reformat the entire thing at one point. So it was a good, 5-6 year process to get this thing out the doors.
Well, I absolutely love the energy. As someone who also moved back to my college town, I went to UW. Your descriptions of Madison are so fun and just so much to learn and so well said. I just want to say that right off the bat. The book is very good and fun for us locals here. But yeah, The Onion's a big deal. And, it started as this smaller thing, and now you can see the influences across popular media, and we're going to get into that. But we do want to talk about the history, because you, as you mentioned, were one of the original Onion staffers, which is just so cool. Can you tell us about those early days at The Onion and how it all got started?
Well, The Onion was started by a friend of mine from the dorms, a guy named Tim Keck, who later became my roommate for a little while. He was like a friend of mine from my freshman year. And Tim came from a Chicago area newspaper family. His mom was one of the first investigative environmental reporters in the 1970s. His dad was the editor of an Indiana newspaper called the Hammond Times, which is part of the sort of broader Chicago metro area. So he grew up in just a completely newspaper-saturated environment. He just sort of knew how to do it from living in it. And so when we were all 20, we were sophomores, and he was running out of money. And he was like, I don't know, what am I going to do? And he's like, I know, I'll start a newspaper. But he didn't know what to put in the newspaper. So we got our friend, Matt Cook, who was an improv comedian, into the mix. And he said, well, why don't you just make everything up? And he said, okay, that sounds like a great idea. So that's how it happened.
Just throwing things at the wall, right?
Yeah, no, totally. Because he had the business side down, because he was very good at that. And he had done a previous business venture, so he already knew kind of local businesses to advertise and that sort of thing. So you kind of had that part figured out. But the content was the challenge. And then, and that's how it started in The Onion. The first year of The Onion was pretty, it was more zany in a lot of ways. There was some real stuff, there was some fake stuff, but the whole thing was very tongue in cheek, from day one, And so that has never changed, really from the beginning. The Onion has always pretended to be like a serious newspaper, and it's not a serious newspaper. So, yeah.
Which is like part of its power, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like playing with the tension between the sort of solemnity of the news, and then you're saying just completely ridiculous things within that format. Like that's adds like 50% to the comedy, in so many ways. So yeah.
I loved reading about that the first issue of The Onion came out in the fall of 1988 with the front page story, Mendota Monster Mauls Madison.
Exactly.
Written by Matt Cook.
Yes.
And it's like it had some politics in there. Like there was actually a lot to it.
Yeah. Well, it was crazy because the Historical Society here on campus has the first year of The Onion on microfilm. Jim Danke, who was the alternative newspaper's librarian there, like was one of the very first people to subscribe to The Onion. So when I went back and read it, because I hadn't read it since 1988, is like a century ago. And then I read the article, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is like way more than I remember. It's extremely silly, but at the time, in the context that I was reading it, it was like, whoa, it kind of made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It kind of creeped me out.
There was like a prescience to it, you
said?
Yeah.
It felt that way. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. And I love the stories because this is actually a real monster. It's the story. I mean, it's not. Okay, actually. Yeah. Fake news.
Maybe it
is. Yeah, I'm a part of it here. No, but I've heard about, monsters in Lake Mendota, and there's mythical lake monster named Bozo. And you like detail how there is actually history with that idea. And it's so good. But it's such a Madison story. And you write about in this book why kind of Madison might have been a perfect birthplace for The Onion, like for this very meaningful and like meaningless tomfoolery. Can you talk about that? Like why Madison was a good birthplace for The Onion?
Well, Madison's full of a lot of extremely smart people, but Madison also has a very silly history as well. So there's like the sort of spirit of Madison that has a trickster spirit, I think. There's other people that have done that, the Pail and Shovel Party and the Zucker brothers and those folks.
People who would like play pranks.
Yeah, did pranks, and the guys who made, Airplane movie, these are like from a while ago. But Madison's always had kind of a prankster history for sure. There's like, its hippie history is definitely a prankster history. Even to this day, if there's like a Madison style protest signs there's always some really funny ones, like that's part of it. But also at that time, you could live in Madison pretty cheaply. Everybody I knew, was like renting, some dumpy student apartment with a bunch of roommates, but you could live there on not that much money. You could work a minimum wage job and still have time for projects and a social life. So there was like a really great music scene at the time. There was interesting art stuff happening. There was just a lot that was going on in Madison at the time. And The Onion was just totally part of that because there was a lot of really great journalism happening at that time too.
I wanted to throw out there the really fun and popular prank about the flamingos on Bascom Hill.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even people outside of Madison seem to know that one. So they may not know why pink flamingos remind them of Madison, but now you know, right? So yeah.
And it's a wild place. Like I was so excited to come here for college. I loved how you described it as the quote New York of Wisconsin. It totally felt that way growing up in Baraboo, like a small town. It's like, can't wait.
You're from Baraboo. Okay, so you're another Sauk County person. Yay.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Let's go. And you're from Spring Green.
Yeah, I'm from Spring Green. Yeah.
And, while we're talking about how did you personally get involved with the paper? Like what brought you to it and what was your role?
Oh, I mean, Tim went to Brazil to meet up with his friend Chris Johnson, who was the co-owner, and they just decided to do this. And then when they came back, Tim was moved into my apartment for like a semester, and he's like, "Hey, do you want to be the art director?" I was like, "Okay, like what's an art director?" But I ended up being the copy editor. But I also drew some pictures, and like everybody sort of helped with everything that first year, So it was basically they were, Tim and Chris just asked their friends to help, and that's basically how that happened. There was no vetting process or anything.
And what did you think of the paper then?
Well, I mean, I read it every week because I was copy editing. I look back now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I made so many mistakes, right? There's typos everywhere. What was I thinking? But it was fun to be, do stuff with your friends and you're just making stuff up. And it was like a Gen X vibe, everyone's speaking in like multi-layeredness all the time. And plus just silly and funny. And it was just lots of energy happening there.
We're having an awesome time here talking with Christine Wentz, author of the newly published Funny Because It's True, How the Onion Created Modern American News Satire. We're going to get into more jokes, headlines, and laughs, but first, a quick break.
This episode is sponsored by Babbel. Are you holding back on foreign travel plans this year because you're afraid of the language gap? I'm not, because I have Babbel. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I'm learning Spanish on Babbel, getting ready for a trip to Mexico City. Babbel is the language learning app that gets you talking. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or at whatever pace you choose. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real-life stuff you actually need when communicating. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. Babbel has given me great lessons on getting directions, ordering in a restaurant, and making plans. And of all the things I'm doing in Mexico City, I'm probably most excited about the soccer game we're going to. So I was excited to learn how to cheer from Babbel. That'll be me you'll hear yelling, "Fuerza Tigres! Fuerza Tigres!" With over 16 million subscriptions sold, Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by a 20-day money-back guarantee. Let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting our listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more, or visit tremfyaradio.com.
Was there a moment when you knew The Onion was going to catch fire?
At the time, no, not really. I mean, I was very early on. I have personally had nothing to do with becoming famous, although I did know a couple of the people who helped make it that I was friends with. You know, at that age, I mean, everybody's trying all kinds of things. There were just so many kind of groovy, interesting things happening. And some people, you know, went on bigger and some didn't. But the cool thing about it was that you didn't really have to think about that. There really wasn't any outside pressure at all, you know? I mean, partly because...
Y'all were in the moment.
Yeah, I was in the moment. And also, like, I think Brian Stack, who was also an ARC improv guy, who now he's performed on the Colbert Report, and he's done Conan, he's like involved in all that whole scene. He was like, Madison was great because you could just explore and experiment and do whatever you wanted, and you didn't have to worry about some big Hollywood casting agent coming to watch you or anything. You know, there was no pressure. There was no social media, you know, so nobody is like sort of monitoring everything you're doing, and like, you know, your picture is not going up online every 10 minutes and no one's hitting like on the thing that you just spontaneously did in 5 minutes. You know, it's just, ideas could kind of develop and flow and evolve in a way that was really organic without really any outside pressure or surveillance, I think. So, yeah.
I love that. And for everyone who's listening, who's a creative, like, this is your city. You've got this space, you know, keep
Absolutely.
creating. There are dozens of interviews in the book, and it's been decades since The Onion launched. Had you stayed in touch with your fellow staffers from the years?
Yeah, I mean, with a couple of people I did. I mean, I hadn't talked to Tim in a long time, but I got in touch with him for this. But I was still in touch with Rich Dahm and Todd Hansen occasionally, you know, because they were my friends from college, right? So, but a lot of the 90s, Gen X 90s staff who really like made it into a big thing, like I hadn't actually known a lot of those people. Like I'd heard their names a million times and they'd actually heard mine, but we'd never actually met, you know? So it was really fun to like finally meet Joe Garden, you know, and like, and all this kind of stuff, all those folks.
Did your memories align?
Yeah. I mean, because I was gone by like 92. I left Madison in 1992 to go out to Seattle to become the editor of The Stranger. A lot of people don't know this. After the first year, Tim Keck and Chris Johnson sold The Onion to 3 other people who had been doing some work there. And then they both went off and started real newspapers. So Tim went to Seattle to start Seattle's alt weekly called The Stranger. And he sort of took everybody from The Onion there with him. So weirdly, Seattle's alt weekly that, became like really prominent in the area was completely created by people from Wisconsin.
We have a far reach.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like everyone.
And that was like the grunge era, So I remember I would just be walking on some random street in Seattle and see somebody from Madison.
My God.
It was just like, wait, what? What are you doing here? So anyway, it was interesting.
So The Onion is super popular in many arenas. And for some folks, it hasn't quite resonated. Like, they don't get it. What was/is the intention behind the satire of The Onion?
Different people are going to have different answers to the question of what the Onion satire is about. Some people say it's just entertaining, there's no deeper meaning about that. There were definitely some folks that really understood it as almost a form of political activism, although Onion-style political activism, not sort of beat you over the head with it. Political activism, I won't go into that anymore. There's a little commentary on that in the book by some folks. But there's also just the silliness. But for me, the heart of The Onion is about like ordinary people and the way that the kind of media and society that we live in like affects ordinary people. That's the area man and area woman stuff. And I also, during the process of researching the book, I also talked to a bunch of media scholars who study news satire, and all these people kind of made their careers in the early 2000s writing books about how The Daily Show is saving democracy and like stuff like that. And now they're like, maybe it's not, but maybe it is. We don't know.
Right. It's trivialized it, but it's been able to do satire and make it,
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting.
It's yes and.
Yeah, exactly. It's yes and, right? The new CEO of The Onion, Ben Collins, he was a disinformation reporter for NBC for a long time. He said he wanted to help kind of rescue The Onion when they became the new owners in 2024, because The Onion, after all this time, The Onion is still like pointing out the BS and is still saying, this is crazy. Like, why is this happening? And doing it in a funny way and an interesting way, in an intelligent way, in a silly way. And that's just the kind of social purpose of The Onion.
You've maxed out your 401k, you're contributing to an IRA, and making some other investments. You're ahead of the game and doing well. But where do you go from here? The same old story can only get you so far. If you want a new take from a new type of financial professional, we invite you to get a fresh perspective beside an agent with the backing of New York Life. Insurance, investments, retirement, and more. Visit NYL.com to learn more. Investments are offered through registered representatives of NYLife Securities, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC, a New York Life company.
Are you still quoting 30-year-old movies? Have you said cool beans in the past 90 days? Do you think Discover isn't widely accepted? If this sounds like you, you're stuck in the past. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. Welcome to the now. It pays to Discover. Learn more at discover.com/credit card, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report.
It's no secret that we are living in strange times, for lack of a better phrase. As satires today, struggle or wrestle with how to make sense / make fun of the world we live in, what lessons do you think they can learn from The Onion?
Don't give up. You don't know if what you do now is going to have an impact in the future. You just never know, right? So I would say don't give up. I would say really understand that it's okay to try things and not get it perfect the first time and try and fail. The Onion's published thousands and thousands and thousands of stories. The method they've developed is, for at least every 100 headlines that go into the process, maybe 2 or 3 come out, So it's totally fine to try a bunch of things. That didn't work. It's okay. Let's go on to the next thing, So, and just remember, who you're writing it for. What's the point of it? I mean, just doing stuff to be silly, that's fine. But The Onion, part of The Onion's sort of heritage is to have a point. That's the point of satire. There's got to be a focus. There's a thing that you're trying to point out with your work. And I think that's important to remember too.
We started out the conversation and you mentioned fake news, but the good type of fake news.
Yeah.
In an era where disinformation is rampant online, do you think, a publication like The Onion is particularly important right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. It's interesting, though, because there's so much humor online now. There's lots and lots of people that are doing comedy. But it was interesting. I just did a public radio interview with the current editor of The Onion, Chad Knackers, who's been there for 27 years, is like the last Madisonian on staff. And he said something interesting, which was that because The Onion is independent again, it doesn't have like corporate overlords that it has to answer to the way that, unfortunately, even like
Most
major
of us.
publications
No.
it's weird because we sort of all do in some ways. Like if you're using a phone, you have a corporate overlord, But he was like, we have a freedom that other people don't, and we can really do what we want. And so I think that they're going to keep doing that.
So, as you mentioned, The Onion has changed a lot over the years, of course, naturally. How do you feel about the current incarnation of The Onion, which recently restarted a monthly print publication and tried to buy Alex Jones's InfoWars? That was fun to watch.
Yeah, that was great. I got a lot of texts that morning. Like, you got to see this. Like, oh no. I thought that was genius. And that's tied up in court right now. So, I mean, it could still go their way, but, we'll see what happens. So I'm really, really happy they brought back the print. And not just, because like that's the way it was back in the day, but I just think that Onion's comedy like works really well in print. There's something about the sort of implied solemnity of like a newspaper that just adds to it. It's not just the AP style. It's like, it's just nice to read something that has a beginning and middle and an end. So I'm all for that. They're doing very funny fake ads now. So in the print edition, it's a membership model. So there aren't any, there's no pizza company ads in there anymore, but they make all these fake ones. And that's actually a new thing for the Onions, to make actual fake advertisements. So that's been funny.
There's a lot of fodder for that.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just really glad that they have, this new freedom to explore, and they're free of, their horrible, private equity, ownership before, which was really just almost like crushing them away completely. So I'm glad that they were rescued and, have a new era of creativity happening. So I'm all for it.
And all of the research you did for the book, there are so many like fun, amusing anecdotes. Do any jump out at you from your research that you're just like, this is going to stay with you forever?
Oh, yeah, there's so many of them. I just love how all the fights that the 90s staff had about these minute details of every story, like Taco Bell launches new morning after burrito, and they're getting in like huge fights about like the details of like the mechanism of how they're like, that's like, I just love that. Like, that's just so, I love that. That's hilarious. And then the 9/11 story is like a really important story too. They really performed an incredibly important public service on that day. So yeah.
Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, the Onion's editorial staff moved to New York in the beginning of 2001. And at that time, the Onion was being published in a number of different cities. They hadn't published, a print issue in New York City yet. And the first print issue in New York City was going to appear on September 16th, 2001, which means they were going to start working on it on basically September 11th. And instead, we all know what happened. So that was canceled, but the following week they published their famous 9/11 issue. And it really, they devoted the whole issue to the attacks, and they were very, very terrified that they were going to be, run out of New York on a rail. They had just a bunch of people from Wisconsin like, hey, here we are, woo, it's New York City, but they pulled it off amazingly well, and people were just so grateful. I was actually living in New York myself at that time. I happened to be out of town that day, but came back the next day. So I remember what it was like then, and remember, what they were just personally, we were all personally dealing with by, just living there. And for them to be able to like pull off, write something like that in a week and have it just to be so dead on, and people just loved it. People were so happy and, said, this is the first time I've laughed since this happened, and we're so grateful to you. And they just got like tons and tons and tons of positive response for that. So yeah.
The power.
Yeah.
Do you still have an all-time favorite Onion headline that you wrote, or somebody else wrote?
Yeah. I mean, I did. When I was there, it was still pretty loose, and they were still writing like there was like fiction and like other stuff. But one of my favorites, it's actually from like 98 or 99, and it's archaeologists uncover ancient race of skeleton people, which is just extremely silly. And I'm sort of like watching science shows nerd kind of thing. And so it always cracks me up when it's like, well, clearly, this stone tool reveals blood. And then they just like make up this whole thing about like this. You're just like, how do you, like, you don't know that. But anyway, I don't think I got the headline exactly right there, but that's one of my favorites for sure.
That's pretty good. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Like, so much fun. The book is so lovely, and it's so like local and inspiring, and everything that The Onion represents. It's really lovely. So can't recommend it enough. You got an event happening tonight.
I do. At Art Lit Lab.
At Art and Literature Laboratory. Before we let you go, like, what can folks expect if they attend?
Well, I'm going to be interviewed by Steve Paulson from Wisconsin Public Radio.
We love Steve.
Everyone loves Steve. I used to work at Wisconsin Public Radio. I was a news announcer there. Like, at the same time I was doing The Onion. So I knew Steve like back when they were starting, to the best of our knowledge. So that's going to be really funny to see him after all this time. And I'm not sure what he's going to ask me, so that will be a surprise. But I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people there. So, and Art Lit Lab is just a great, great location. They're fantastic people that perform such an amazing community service. So I'm excited to be there tonight. So yay.
Well, I'm sure it was a pleasure ride for you, but thank you for the service of writing this book. It's really great to have this history, and we also super appreciate you coming on CityCast Madison. Christine, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Christine Wentz, one of the original team members who launched The Onion and author of the new book, Funny Because It's True: How The Onion Created Modern American News Satire. If you want to check out her talk tonight at Art Lit Lab, head to our show notes for a link. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with your funniest friend? Bonus points if they love news satire. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, I'll leave you with a great Onion headline. Quote, "Nothing would surprise me at this point," says man who will be shocked by 8 separate news items today. Bada boom. All right, see you tomorrow.